Welcome to a very special episode of Palace Confidential. Now, our viewers are always telling us that they want more on Princess Anne, the ultimate unsung hero of the royal family. Obviously, that's a brilliant idea. So to mark her 75th birthday, we thought we'd devote a whole show to her, and who better to talk about her than the man who has interviewed her 7 times and met her many more. I am, of course, talking about the Daily Mail's Robert Hardman. Welcome to the programme, Robert.
Hi, Joe.
Now, before we get going, a reminder, for more great royal shows like this, please do subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel and think about subscribing too to our free weekly newsletter. Also in the description below is a link to Robert's latest royal biography. It's called Charles III and it's obviously a fantastic read. Now, we can't, of course, cover her entire life in one show, but we will try to bring out some of the best bits. So, Robert, let's go back to the start. Now, it's often said that for all its privilege, King Charles found his childhood quite hard. Now, long periods without his parents, a boarding school he didn't like, and at just 3 years younger, what was her experience like? Similar?
She looks back on her childhood with great fondness. She loved the sort of roughy-tufty of sort of royal life in those days, and she loved school. It's always worth remembering that those two, they're the only people alive on Earth who were there the night that George VI died at Sandringham. They were staying there with their grandparents. And Charles was a little boy, Anne was really little more than a toddler, but her parents had gone off on this round the world tour and left them with the grandparents, so they were both there in the house that night, and I think that there is that sort of bond between them. They were there right from the start of the reign. Andrew and Edward obviously came later on, 1960 in the case of Andrew, 64 in the case of Edward, but those two had been part of the Elizabeth II story from beginning to end. It's
fascinating, isn't it? And to me, for Anne, she's sort of like always accepted that she's a royal, and it comes with tradition and it comes with duty. And she got straight into the royal engagements after leaving school.
Yeah, she went to Benenden. She started off with a governess at the palace. She didn't like that very much. She was very keen to go to school. She asked, "Can I please be sent away to school?" Whereas, Prince Charles famously didn't really want to go. She did. Went to Benenden in Kent. Loved it, got on really well, made lots of friends. I talked to her about it, and she said she could never quite understand. She said everyone was always terrified of the headmistress, and she said I wasn't. I couldn't understand why people were. You probably thought, well, the headmistress is probably quite scared of you.
I think there might be a reason.
But she loved it there, and she did reasonably well. She got, by the standards of the day, got 2 decent A levels, certainly enough to get her into university. She didn't want to go to university. She wanted to do professional full-time equestrianism, but also royal duties. So she left school and went straight into this sort of hybrid of riding at a really world-class level eventually, and also helping out the monarchy.
Yeah, and when did the horses become the passion that they did?
Well, all through her childhood, she loved ponies and horses. She actually shared a pony with Prince Charles when they were very little, and it was always said that it was sort of, Anne would be sort of fighting to get on this creature, and Charles was quite happy to say, well, it's all yours if you want. She loved riding from an early age, and it became fairly obvious fairly early on that she was really good at this, so that really by the end of the 60s, she was she was competing in top level horse trials. And by 1971, she was European champion. I mean, it was a major thing. It was on, the press loved it. I mean, she became a genuine bona fide sporting superstar, and it's amazing that at the end of that year she was voted BBC Sports Personality of the Year, and who came second? George Best. So I mean, that was here was something where you couldn't fake it. It was genuine talent on her part, and obviously on the horse's part as well. But I mean, she was clearly marked out to be a really top class event rider. And 5 years after that, there she was representing Britain at the Olympics, the Montreal Olympics in 1976. So
I remember being a little girl and watching that, being like quite blown away. But a long time.
She doesn't. Funny enough, she can't remember most of it because she on the cross country course she fell off and was badly concussed.
I don't remember that.
And sort of got back on and finished, but really to this day sort of says just sort of hazy memories of what really happened there.
Considering her track record, I'd be a lot more scared of horses than Anne is, but hey, there you go. Now, alongside that sporting success, she was really being celebrated in the media as something of a style, beauty and a fashion icon.
Yeah, because Britain hadn't had a sort of glamorous young princess really since obviously Elizabeth and Margaret, a generation before. And by the end of the 60s, Princess Anne was, she was with all the fashions. You look back at some of the pictures, and she's got these extraordinary hats and skirts and whatever. She's, she's definitely of the moment. And in 3 successive years, I think, or certainly in that period, in the early 70s, she was on the cover of Vogue magazine 3 times, Vogue cover girl 3 times. And she was, she was, by at the time people said she was cool. I mean, she was. She'd go to things like there was a very risque musical on in the West End called Hair. I think it was the first time there was ever any kind of nudity on the London stage. She didn't just go along and watch it. She was actually seen by someone in the press in a purple jumpsuit dancing on stage at the end with everybody else. So she was, she was having a relatively normal life as a princess.
She was a cool 70s young person.
Yeah, absolutely.
But contrast that to now, and the Anne we know now. You can imagine her current persona, seeing things like being a style icon, being on the cover of Vogue as frippery.
Yeah, I mean, she would just laugh about it. I mean, she was something of a in that Netflix series, The Crown. Full of mistakes though it was, one of the things I think it did capture was that sort of glamour potential of the young Princess Anne, and in that I think we get a sense of her as being sassy, cool, and it was quite funny. I was making a program on her for her 70th birthday, around the time The Crown was on the airwaves, and we were filming her sitting for a bust, a sculpture of her. She was sort of sitting there chatting to the sculptress, who asked her about The Crown and had she seen it. She said, I haven't seen it, but she said, I've read in a magazine that the actress who plays me, it takes her about 2.5 hours and lots of people to do her hair. She said, it takes me 15 minutes and I do it myself. I just thought that is so her.
That's brilliant.
That just sums her up, really.
I love that. Well, inevitably, as a young woman, she started dating, and there was an early romance with a certain Andrew Parker Bowles. Yes,
that's been documented. I mean, they were, he was a very talented horseman. A lot of her in that period when she was sort of she'd left school, professional equestrian, so she was on meeting a lot of people in the sort of the horsey world, and that's when of course she met her future husband, Captain Mark Phillips. He'd been I think he'd been a member of the British Olympic team, I think maybe the reserve at the 68 Olympics, and certainly competed in 72. I mean, he was a very serious competitor, really top of his trade, and so they basically they kind of fell in love over horses.
And a nod to her fashion forwardness, I remember her Zandra Rhodes wedding dress. Tell us about that big royal wedding.
Well, it was an extraordinary royal wedding in that it really set the template for the modern royal wedding that we think of today. And before then, these had been events where the cameras would sort of keep a discreet distance. I mean, the Queen's own wedding in 1947, there's really very little of it that we see. Sort of bits of it are picked up and recorded on audio, but it was very much the cameras were sort of at the back, trying to sort of keep a low profile. You had Princess Margaret's wedding in 1960, which was televised to a degree, but it was still it was black and white, and the cameras were it was all very, very respectful.
Yeah.
The princess's wedding, by the time we get to 1973, there's been a major innovation, which was the introduction of colour television.
Do you remember how excited we all were?
Oh, well, you know what? The very first big event on colour TV was actually the investiture of Prince Charles at Carnarvon Castle.
Yes, yeah.
That was the year it all started. But yeah, I mean, it was so exciting, and people talked about, you know, now in colour.
Yes.
So you had, I mean, still most people, and I remember I watched that wedding. I was a little boy at school, and we watched it on a black and white TV. But I mean, it was in colour. And it was the first time that the cameras were allowed really to sort of capture, you know, to be up level with the altar, to sort of see the vows, to really to make this a much more intimate event, and it was hugely popular. And I think it possibly had something to do with the fact that at that point the Royal Press Secretary was a chap called Ron Allison, who had been the BBC's royal correspondent previously. So he, you know, they had sort of TV know-how, and it was a great success. You know, it was a wintry wedding, honeymoon spent on the royal yacht in. And then settled down to married life. Captain Mark Phillips he was still in the army at that point. And very soon after their wedding was this horrific event, which, I mean, you look back on it and think, how on earth did this happen? But the next year, 1974, she and Captain Phillips were coming back from a charity film premiere in one of the cars from the Royal Car Fleet, from the Royal Mews, and they were coming back down the Mall towards the palace, and suddenly a car swerved in front, blocked the way, stopped the car, and out got this bloke with a gun. And he was a man,
so
terrifying man called Ian Ball. And so this man jumps out of the car. He's got a gun, and he starts shooting at people. The first person to jump out of the royal car is the princess's personal detective, Jim Beaton, who is very brave, jumps straight in front of the gunman, who shoots at him, and Jim Beaton tries to get a shot off, but the gun jams, and all he can do is just put himself in the way, and I think he got shot 2 or 3 times. He was badly hurt. The chauffeur got shot. There was a passerby got shot. Ian Ball tried to drag the princess out of the car. There's still some dispute about exactly the form of words, but he.
But I like the legend.
Well, no. The legend is that he tried to pull her out of the car and said, "You're coming with me," and she said, "Not bloody likely."
Yeah, you can hear her saying that.
You can hear her saying it. I think those were the words she said. I think what he actually said was, "You're coming with me. I'm demanding a ransom of £1 million," and it was to that she said, "Not bloody likely." But anyway, she wasn't going anywhere. She had Mark Phillips holding on to her, the gunman trying to pull her out, and she wouldn't give way, and she kept her nerve, and eventually the guy gave up. He wasn't going to get her out of the car, and he ran off, and ended up being rugby tackled by a policeman, was arrested and sent to Broadmoor. I mean, it's shocking when you look back on it, how close everyone in that car came to actually being killed.
And how accessible a member of the royal family was.
Well, after that, everything changed. So that was when they introduced things like backup cars. One of the interviews I did with her, we talked about it. And I wondered, you know, how she'd respond. And she was very matter of fact. She just said, well, actually, I had thought about it in advance, because one of the things she said you're trained to do when you're, when you're in a 3-day event, you're doing all this equestrianism, is you're always thinking ahead. You have to think what would happen if the horse does this, or if such and such happens. She says, you know, thinking ahead and having a kind of a pre-plan in the event of things going wrong. You always have that at the back of your mind. So she said, you know, she had given some thought to moments like this, and she took the view, I'm not going anywhere. And afterwards, the thing that annoyed her most was that that Ball had been pulling on her dress and had ripped the sleeve and had ruined a perfectly good dress, you know, typically her.
I can relate.
But I mean, you know, for the Queen and Prince Philip, I mean, they were woken up in the middle of the night. They were on a state visit to Indonesia and took this call in the early hours, say, look, you know, someone's tried to kidnap the princess and shots have been fired, but she's okay.
Yeah.
And in sort of typical sort of royal stiff upper lip, the state visit to Indonesia continued. The princess sort of got on with life. But when the Queen came back, she did. She had a special investiture for all those who'd been involved, because I mean people had been really heroic that day.
Absolutely.
And quite rightly, Jim Beaton was awarded the George Cross, which is the highest decoration you can get. Apart from the Victoria Cross,
it's just extraordinary.
And went on to become the president of the VC and GC Association, which is sort of the club for the very bravest people in the land. So that was a shocking moment. But you know, this was the 70s. I mean, terrorism was rife, kidnappings were commonplace, particularly on the continent. You had sort of politicians and millionaires being kidnapped and shot at. I mean, it was a rough time. But she pressed on. You know, for her, it was the equestrian career was what mattered most, and so she that's what took her to the Olympics in Montreal.
Indeed. I just want to quickly circle back to Mark Phillips for a minute, Captain Mark Phillips. Again, in indicating that she was a rather modern royal, I think a lot of people would have expected him to be traditionally given a royal title, but they decided against that.
They decided against it. So, for example, when Princess Margaret had married Tony Armstrong-Jones, the Queen had made him Earl of Snowdon, because in those days it was sort of seen that you couldn't really have a princess, you couldn't have the sort of the daughter of the sovereign being technically Mrs. By the 70s, times had changed, views had changed, and it was very much their decision, not the Queen's. Had they wanted, you know, for Mark Phillips to be made Earl of something or other, I mean, that wouldn't have changed. You know, she would have carried on being Princess Anne. What it would have meant was that the children then had some sort of title, and you know, if he'd been made Earl of, for argument's sake, I don't know, wherever, you know, Earl of Gatcombe, and then there would have been a courtesy title for their eldest son, who would have been Viscount whatever. Zara would have been Lady Zara Phillips. But they decided no. Her view was, and again, I've talked to her about it. She just said, you know, we looked at, you know, where they are, what's likely to happen, how life is likely to sort of unfold for her children, and clearly they were very unlikely to be sort of playing any sort of official role in royal life. She totally understood the system of male primogeniture. She had two brothers below Charles. Obviously, they were in due course. Undoubtedly, you know, they would have children. So as time went on, she and her family would kind of move further and further away from the royal orbit, and she just felt that in the modern world, actually having a title didn't really help, and her children could make their own way in life without one, and so they have. But
nobody can take away from Anne and Mark that they did indeed produce our late Queen's first grandchild.
They did. 1977, Peter came along. And the Queen was absolutely thrilled. There was some consternation at the palace that day, because there was an investiture going on, and the Queen sort of didn't turn up. She was late, and everyone thought, Queen late? And the Queen's never late. And then she arrived about 10 minutes later, and I'm frightfully sorry, I've just become a grandmother.
Aww,
and it was a, you know, rounds of applause. And it was great. You know, she loved being a grandmother, and yeah, there was always that sort of special. I think, you know, to this day, Peter Phillips, he's a very understated chap. He's made his own way in the world.
Yeah.
He's, you know, he's absolutely not a sort of look at me type. He just sort of gets on with things. He was actually a very good rugby player. Played for Scottish schools rugby, and that's you know how it, I think is typical of that family. It's, you know, they don't seek the limelight. They occasionally find themselves in it, but they're quite happy not being in it.
Do you think, in hindsight, that the rather different, more relaxed approach to Philip and Zara's upbringing has been the right one?
Well, I think it all depends on you know what sort of a role you want in life. I mean, they didn't seek and have never sought to sort of take on official royal duties. I mean, they could have done in a previous generation. I mean, that's what would have happened. I mean, if you go back to you know, the children of George V, children of Edward VII, children of Queen Victoria, or children. I mean, Princess Margaret. I mean, she had a sort of an official role, an official life. She had decided that wouldn't be the case for her children, and I think that was the template, really. Sort of Princess Margaret's children, Lord Linley, as was Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones. They had their own. You know, they were private citizens and they were going to pursue their own way in life, and I think that was the model for Peter and Zara, and that's how it's been.
Yeah, indeed. Now, the marriage between Anne and Mark didn't have a happy ending, and it also came at a difficult time generally for the royal family, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean the marriages, you know, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
But I remember being quite small and quite shocked because I didn't know that the royal family could do that as a small child.
Well, I think the precedent really had started with, again, Princess Margaret. She'd separated and then divorced Lord Snowdon back in the 70s. So it had happened. That at the time was very shocking because, you know, that really hadn't happened to a sort of senior royal since the days of Henry VIII. I mean, you know, royals didn't get divorced. The Queen's cousin, Lord Harwood, had got divorced in the 60s, but he was sort of fairly remote in royal terms. But yeah, it was definitely the first of a number of crises in the early 90s, domestic family crises for the Queen. And yeah, I mean, it came to a head in 1992, that extraordinary year, which actually started with sort of cracks appearing in the Yorks marriage following the discovery of some photographs which ended up in the papers of the Duchess with someone who wasn't the Duke. By this stage, the Princess, she'd become the Princess Royal by then, by the way. I mean, 1987, the Queen gave her the title Princess Royal. It's a sort of special title that it's not automatically bestowed, but it tends to be given to the eldest daughter of the sovereign, you know, if they've done particularly sort of good things for the country. And there's no question that, you know, she deserved that in 1987. Anyway, 5 years on from that, she got divorced, and so their divorce didn't come as a huge surprise, I think, to the country. I mean, the couple had drifted apart some time before, but their divorce came about in that extraordinary year. So, as I say, it began with, you know, the Yorks marriage, and then their separation, and you had the divorce of Princess Anne and Mark Phillips. Then, of course, you had the Andrew Morton book. You had the very public deterioration of the Prince and Princess of Wales's marriage. By that autumn, you had the announcement that the Waleses were separating. You had Windsor Castle burning down. Yes. I mean, it was just a dreadful year for the Queen, with one happy ending. And at the end of that year, it was the Princess Royal and Tim Lawrence, Commander Tim Lawrence, as he was at the time, getting married at Crathy Kirk on the Balmoral estate.
Well, we will get onto that because, as we know, as Robert alludes to, this story does get happier with even more romance, and we'll get to that. But some of your comments and questions first about the Princess Royal. P.S. says, I saw that clip where Princess Anne addressed the King as Old Bean, and I thought it was so wonderful. Robert, that was quite a nice comment, wasn't it? What does it say about their relationship? It
was wonderful. That was the documentary I wrote, actually, called Charles III, The Coronation Year, for the BBC, and we were filming behind the scenes. Our excellent camera crew were inside the palace on the day of the coronation, and they caught all the excitement as everyone set off to the Abbey, and then they caught that huge sense of relief when everybody came back. And there was this sweet moment as the royal family are sort of gathering to go out onto the balcony for the big kind of wave at the end of it and the fly past. And actually the palace is a building site at the time. It's the East Wing. I mean, it really was. It was sort of chaos. So everything was sort of held up with bits of tape. There was sort of floorboards covered in chipboard. Well, no, and so everyone was sort of treading quite carefully to make sure they didn't sort of snag a robe on a stray nail or whatever. And then they came into the centre room, which is a room that leads out onto the balcony. And it was really the first time they'd all had the chance to sort of have a chat after the service. And the princess sort of comes in, sees the king, goes, "Hello, old bean." And it's just a rather wonderful moment. You just, that's...
And so English.
It's so English, but it's that relationship, actually. It's quite an important one, for the sovereign to have that sort of, particularly for a king. King George V was always terribly fond of his sister. It was a very sort of endearing connection. And that was a key day, because people often forget. But the coronation, there you've got the gold state coach, you've got all the crowns, you've got all the ritual, and the king leaves the abbey in the gold state coach with the queen and 4,000 troops or whatever. But riding just behind the gold state coach, there is the Princess Royal, because she's gold stick in waiting in her capacity as Colonel of the Blues and Royals.
Yeah.
And all the rest of the family are in cars or in carriages, in the case of the Waleses. But there's one who's in the rain on a horse in her capacity as a very senior bodyguard.
But I love the old bean comment, because at once it's affectionate as well as reminding him that he's just your annoying brother.
No, he was very touched by that.
Yeah, I love
One other thing I think is always worth rewind, have a look back at the official coronation photo. There they all are, lined up. Who is the right-hand man? Who's on the king's right-hand side? It's the Princess Royal. Queen Camilla's on his left. Princess Anne's there, because they as I said, they've just been there. They've been part of that show from the very beginning. She is the only one who remembers their days as the children, not of the Queen, but of the Duchess of Edinburgh, as she was.
Well, Sarah writes, "I find the spare situation fascinating. King George V and King George VI were both the spare. Also, Anne was second born, so technically the spare, and she's not done such a bad job." Now, Robert, how do you think she's handled it? And could she perhaps have given advice to people who haven't enjoyed the spare role as much?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. Yeah, I mean, the 20th century royal story is a long list of number twos, as you say, George V, George VI. Princess Margaret was a spare. Prince Andrew, you could argue, was a spare as the second son, but Anne is very much in that role, and I think she's handled it perfectly. She's from the start understood that the throne is not coming her way. She's also understood that under the old system of male primogeniture, which is now doesn't apply anymore, the royal family have changed the succession rules, but all through her childhood, youth, and most of her life, she was always going to have to come beneath her brothers in the pecking order. That's the way it was. She had no problem with that at all. I've asked her several times, did you find it difficult? Did you find you were being a kind of role model for women growing up as the only princess in the family at that time? And she just said, well, not really, because in the royal family you're an honorary man anyway. You become a sort of you're a colonel of this or a colonel of that or an admiral of this. It's a sort of how the tradition works. So she was always very comfortable with playing this role. Always, gradually as other royal babies come along, she moves from sort of single figures in the order of succession. Suddenly she's in the top 10, then it's top 20, then it's top 30. It's the sort of way it goes, really. Yeah. She gets that. She has no issue with that, because she fully understands that that's the system. That's why she's a princess anyway. I mean, because her mother ended up as queen as a result of this process. I mean, it's just you take it as you find it, and you make the most of it. And I think she, from an early age, wanted to play a full royal role, and she pays a lot of credit to her father, Prince Philip. Was someone who was a very, very strong, very important influence on her in her early years of royal duties. And he said to her, look, don't do too much. Lots of people want you to do lots of things. And that was the old sort of royal business model, that somebody like the princess could be expected to suddenly become the sort of patron of 500-600 different charities, but never really have a clue what any of them did, and just sort of spend your life turning up, cutting ribbons and unveiling things and saying, have you come far? That wasn't her style. She wanted to get stuck in with a handful of charities that she understood, and And I mean, the two that really stand out are Save the Children and Riding for the Disabled. You know, she has been with them for so long. I mean, there is nobody within the Save the Children orbit who knows that organisation as well as she does, and they're incredibly grateful for all that she's done over the years. I mean, I remember when I was a child watching that very popular TV children's programme Blue Peter, and they did a Blue Peter special assignment, and it was a young Princess Royal going off with the presenter Valerie Singleton. On to look at Save the Children projects in Kenya, and it was incredible at the time. You know, you saw the two of them. They were swimming off the coast of East Africa. They were riding through the bush. But at the heart of it, they were looking at the work of Save the Children with a lot of street children in Nairobi, and it was, you know, you saw the impact that she could make, because in those days, you know, charities were much more sort of traditional organisations. You didn't really see their work overseas, and she's been with them all the way through. Riding for the Disabled, she really helped sort of put that on the map. And she's always been very keen on the sort of slightly unsung heroes. For example,
as an unsung hero herself for this programme, indeed. Well, let's hear from Donna now, who says nobody can do those deep curtsies like the Princess Royal, the incredible, fabulous Princess Anne, personally my favourite royal. And that leads to an interesting question from Sophie in Copenhagen, who asks, "Hi, always watching Palace Confidential," we'd love to hear that. "Please let me know why Princess Anne does not curtsy to Queen Camilla. Regards from Sophie from Copenhagen." Now, I know a lot of people want a really delicious, gossipy answer to this, but I know you've got a altogether...
I'm afraid there's just a sort of convention that royal ladies don't have to curtsy to each other, because otherwise they'd be doing it all the time. At a big official royal event, you might curtsy to the monarch. But that once, but otherwise you'd just be bobbing up and down the whole time. And
but everyone they get on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in my book, my biography of the king, it was really interesting talking to the princess about, and this was for the documentary as well, just about the whole process of transition for her brother and what it all meant. And she also very repeatedly talked about how important Queen Camilla is, and her words were, she said she's been absolutely outstanding in the role. She's a huge fan. She's known it for years anyway, but she gets how tough that role is, and the importance of having a rock steady consort, and as something of the King's rock herself, she can certainly see that Queen Camilla is what is needed, and she's very appreciative of that.
We love to hear that. Well, as always, let us know your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and maybe we can get Robert back on to answer them about Anne or indeed any other royals. He knows everything. So let's get back to it now. Now, Robert, in the darkness of Anne's failing marriage, you alluded to earlier, came the light of a new love, and she found him rather close to home.
Yeah, Commander Tim Lawrence had been the equerry to the Queen, and love blossomed, and it's been a great partnership. I mean, he's very much hugely regarded, hugely respected member of the royal team. Has never sought any sort of official royal position. He's not in any, he doesn't come with royal status or a royal office or whatever, but he's very much part of, he's there to support her when required. Has led an extraordinary successful career in his own right, both during his days in the Royal Navy, rising right to the top, becoming Vice Admiral, and subsequently afterwards. I mean, for example, he became the chairman of English Heritage, in which capacity I interviewed him actually a couple of times. And I think that was very interesting, because you've got a big heritage organisation, just like the National Trust, and it was just at the time the National Trust was getting into all sorts of culture war trouble and endless rows about it. It was just going wrong left, right and centre. English Heritage just sort of sailed through all this. There was never any rows. It just got on with it. And I think he was, in all the organisations he's been involved with, and other organisations, as Commonwealth War Graves Commission. He's a sort of solid and steady front row, doesn't want to be in the spotlight. Just wants to
perhaps even at his own wedding. I mean, you were at their rather more modest wedding.
Their wedding was, I can confidently say, was the cheapest royal wedding in history. Yep, they didn't want to fuss. It was at Crathie Kirk, the little church next to the Balmoral estate. It's December. It's freezing, and the bride was driven to the church in her father's Range Rover. We, the press, were sort of, there was a gale blowing, it was snowing, it was absolutely miserable. And everyone...
She likes a winter wedding.
And it was a sort of family only, and they'd driven up to the church. There was this time no cameras inside at all. It was a private event. There was we barely got a picture of the bride arriving and the bride and groom leaving. And then they went back to the castle, which was shut for the winter. Balmoral shuts in the winter, so they'd opened up a couple of rooms for a reception of, I think it was soup and sandwiches, few speeches, and it was all done by all over by about 7:30, and that was it. And the Queen and the rest of the royal, Queen and the rest of the royal family, they all went back to, I think they flew back down to London, and the honeymoon lasted all of about 3 or 4 days in a borrowed cottage on the Balmoral estate. I mean, it was the low budget royal wedding, but hey, it's been a great. They've been a great team, continue to be a great team.
I mean, you mentioned before he's got his own illustrious career, but he hasn't seemed to have had any of the teething problems that a lot of non-royal people do when they marry into the family.
Well, he had been in a quarry. He'd also been a long-serving Royal Naval officer, and I mean the palace does. The Windsors are a forces family, and a lot of royal life does operate on a sort of military or naval basis. Very, very distinguished Royal Naval officer in his youth as well. I mean, I've talked to him about it. He doesn't make a lot about it, but he was actually decorated for undercover work, stopping arms smuggling operations to the IRA. He would have been in the Falklands War, and if he had been, he would have been sunk because his previous ship was HMS Sheffield, and he was moved off HMS Sheffield to go and do work on patrols off Northern Ireland, and he left behind his ship, the Sheffield, which then set sail for the South Atlantic and was sunk by an Argentine missile. So his naval career was a long and prosperous one. But I think that equipped him well for moving into the royal space. And also, I mean, he's married to the Princess Royal, who knows all about when important ritual and protocol and what you do and what you don't do. But at the same time, is one of the least sort of stuffy, one of the least protocol-minded members of the family too. I mean, very, very low maintenance
and very no nonsense, as a recent profile of her suggested, where she said that she wasn't bothered about this so-called milestone birthday and plans to keep going until she's 70.
Yeah, well, I myself was trying to, having done a program with her for her 70th, I was rather hoping to do something for her 75th, but she doesn't regard birthdays with a 5 in them as being of the slightest importance. But she did actually, that's not quite true, she did have a 75th birthday party, which I went to at the palace the other day, and when I say party, it consisted of a conference in the palace ballroom of about 150 of her charities, followed by a reception, sort of tea, I think maybe and a bit of champagne, I'm not sure, but and cake and sandwiches. But it was entirely about charity, and the focus of it was not on the fact that Princess Royal was turning 75. The focus of it, I seem to recall, was the impact of AI on the charity sector and what are we going to do about it. So that's her, that was her idea of a party.
Important.
But I was thinking, I mean, she's in so many ways, she is just an original. Going right back to her when she was 21, her 21st birthday, and the Queen said to her, well, where would you like to have your 21st birthday? Do you want it at Windsor? Would you like to have it at Buckingham Palace? Would you like it at Balmoral? She said, no, I'd like it in Portsmouth, please. I want to have it in the Royal Yacht. And so for, I think, the only time ever, they pulled up the carpet in the royal drawing room on the yacht and put a disco in.
Oh, I love that fact. But I mentioned at the top of the show, you've interviewed her many times. people will be desperate to know, what is she really like? What's in person? What's your impression?
As with her late father, who I also interviewed a number of times, you really need to do your homework. You know, she doesn't want sort of glib, silly questions, but she's fascinating to talk to. On whatever the issue happens to be. I mean, sometimes on one occasion I was talking to her about her work overseas, or talking to her about the role of the Queen. You know, she's got really interesting observations, very good memory, not so, you know, good eye for a you know, the odd anecdote. Yeah. Loves it when things don't go entirely to plan, always has done. But you know, does her homework, and she'll just let slip these fascinating little sort of aperçus into what makes her tick. Well, another favourite one actually has suddenly come back to me, where I was talking to her about. So we just filmed her helping the Queen at a garden party at Buckingham Palace, and I was talking to her about garden parties and the fact that you get these huge sort of crushes, the crowd sort of, you see these lines going through the crowd, everyone wanting to sort of shake hands with the monarch. And she said, what I like to do is, when I'm on a garden party, I like to skirt around the edge of the flower beds and find the people who are holding back, who don't want to get in with the crowd, the sort of people. She says, I always find it's really interesting talking to those people who are they're the sort of modest, shy people who are slightly wondering, you know, why am I even here?
Oh,
and suddenly they're sort of standing having a cup of tea, and there's Princess Anne going, oh, hello, now why are you here?
That.
You know, that's the sort of thing she does.
But
and
that's a great host.
Yeah, that is, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you see, if you look through, I mean, all our viewers and listeners can go online and go to the Palace website and look through the long list of all her charities and organisations, and there are some sort of very obscure ones there, because she likes to make sure that, you know, the small organisations that don't get left behind. It's not all about the big sort of star celebrity charities.
Absolutely. What's she like talking about the rest of her family?
She's quite guarded about that. She doesn't like to put words in other people's mouths. You know, I mean, her stock response would be, well, you better ask them. Yeah. You know, what does the king think about this? Well, you better ask him. So she's quite careful on that front. They all are. I mean, they're not given to speculation about each other.
Yeah, but she is close to her siblings. We know that. She's not afraid to speak her mind. She's pretty blunt, but she can be quite warm and inclusive. She was the one who we saw hugging Harry, you know, at the event after the death of our late Queen. Well,
we were told about that in Harry's book, but yeah. No, she you know, she has a very kind of normal and often sort of, you know, cheeky, amusing, entertaining, whatever relationship with her children, with her grandchildren. I mean, you know, Gatcombe Park, where she lives. I mean, on that estate, it's interesting that all, you know, both Zara and her family and Peter and his family, they all kind of live on the estate in different sort of bits of different farms. But I mean, they're all there or thereabouts. Yeah. And you know, the grandchildren are always sort of turning up on their ponies, and she just sort of, you know, she'll drop in to see them. I mean, it's quite it's a very close-knit unit, and there's no standing on sort of ceremony there.
But can you see her adopting, in her own way, the Prince Philip role in the family, sort of like being that sort of like quiet diplomat, the connector?
I don't think she would ever want to sort of assume a sort of paterfamilias sort of head of the family kind of role. That wouldn't be her way at all. But she's definitely there for you know, offering any sort of advice. And I think really in the Queen's later years, it was a particularly important relationship. You know, she would ring up the Queen every day. They'd have chats, and it was just very sweet. I think particularly after the death of Prince Philip, she was a real force for good in that regard. She was a real help to the late Queen. And I think it was purely by chance, as she herself told me. She said it was a pure bit of luck that she happened to be on her way down from the west of Scotland, heading back to London that week that the Queen passed away, and so she stopped over at Balmoral, and she was there at the end, and I think that's so important.
Oh well. Anne once had something to say about a speech you gave, didn't she?
Gosh, I did. Well, yes, I once did a speech at a city livery dinner. The fishmongers, great, one of the most senior of the city livery companies. Anyway, I was asked to do a speech there, and nearer the time was told that actually the princess, who's a very keen, again, it's classic her. She gets stuck into an organisation. She really understands it. She's a very active champion and former prime warden of the fishmongers company. So she was there, and anyway, I did my speech, and I thought I'm just not going to say anything afterwards. I'll just sort of, I'll have my cup of coffee or whatever. And she was very nice. She just came up and said, "Yeah, good speech. Just one mistake." And I thought, "That's perfect."
What was the speech about?
It was. I was actually paying tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh.
Oh.
Because he was also prime warden of this organisation.
Okay, so she's quite a tough crowd then to while you're sitting.
Well, you always have to, like I said, as when you're interviewing the Duke of Edinburgh, as so it is when you're interviewing a princess royal. You need to do your homework. Small talk. You're not going to get away with it.
So go on. What was the one mistake?
Oh, I'd alluded to a particular part of Buckingham Palace, and I got it slightly wrong. And
the princess pedant was there to pick you up.
No, she very nicely just sort of said, "I think you'll find that wasn't X or Y," and it's like, yeah, maybe you're right, but she should know.
I love that. She probably should. Well, what better way to mark her 75 years than with 75 pictures of Princess Anne in our special montage. A very happy 75th birthday to the Princess Royal from all of us here at Palace Confidential. Thank you so much to the always authoritative Robert Hardman. You can find more information about his book in the description below. And while you're down there, you can also find out how to subscribe to our free weekly Royal newsletter. And if you did enjoy this, you might like to subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel. Go on, you won't regret it. It's free, and we'll see you next time on Palace Confidential. Bye for now.